Okay, in this little presentation we're going to be looking at fraction and decimal equivalents. That's fractions and decimals that are the same value, they're the same size, they're just written down differently. Okay, let's have a look at this first one. The fraction 1/10 tells us that we've got one whole divided into 10 equal pieces, so we've got a denominator of 10, and we've got a numerator of 1 because we're looking at one of those pieces. One piece out of 10 pieces, that's 1/10. If we look at the decimal fraction 0.1, it tells us that we've got 1/10 because the first digit after the decimal point is the 10th digit, and it tells us we've got 1 out of 10 equal pieces, 1/10. So we can write 1/10 down as 1/10 as a fraction, 1 over 10, or a 0.1. And that's the same for other tenths. So the fraction 2/10 is the same as writing 0.2 because we've got 2/10 in both of those ways of writing it down, both of those expressions. A really common one, of course, is a half. So in a half we've got two equal pieces making up the whole, and we're looking at one of those pieces, so we've got a half. A half is equivalent to 0.5 as a decimal fraction, and that's because we've got 5/10. 5 out of 10, that's half. So a half is equal to 0.5 as a decimal fraction. In the same way, a quarter is the same as 0.25. So a quarter tells us that we've got 4 equal pieces, and we're looking at one of those. 0.25 says that we've got 25 hundredths, and of course 4 lots of 25 hundredths is 100 hundredths, or a whole one. So a quarter is the same as 0.25 written as a decimal fraction. And 3/4 written as a decimal fraction is 0.75. We can write the fraction a half in a different way, in a different fraction equivalent. For instance, 50 over 100, a numerator of 50, a denominator of 100, tells us that we've got one whole broken into 100 equal pieces, and we're looking at 50 of those, or half. So 50 over 100 is the same as saying a half, which is the same as saying 0.5. So we can either write the fraction down as a half or one of its other fraction equivalents. It's still equivalent to 0.5 as a decimal fraction. And the same is true with 25 hundredths. 25 hundredths is the same as a quarter, which is the same as 0.25. When we're looking at some fractions, such as 2/5, it's not very easy to just translate them or turn them straight away into a decimal fraction. We might have to change those to another equivalent fraction to make it easier. So you can see what I've done here is I've turned 2/5 into its equivalent fraction of 4/10, and of course 4/10 is a decimal fraction, 0.4. We've got 4 in the tenths column. Here's a little table that might be helpful to show some of the fraction decimal equivalents. Have a look at this question from the past SAT paper. See if you can work out which two to tick. These are the two you should have ticked. 0.25 is equivalent to 1/4, but so is 25 over 100, 25 100ths. You saw that before, didn't you? In this question, you're asked to circle the number that's greater out of the fraction and its decimal fraction. See if you can have a go at which ones you think should be circled. Before we unpick this question, these are the ones you should have circled to see how well you did. But now we're going to have a look at each one individually to see why it's the largest number. In this example, 1.5 is the same as 1.5. And 1.5 is bigger than 1.2. The reason 1.5 is bigger than 1.2 is because it's got one whole one and 5 tenths, but 1.2's got one whole one and only 2 tenths. So that's quite an easy one. 1.5 is the same as 1.5, which is bigger than 1.2. If we change 1 1/4 to a decimal fraction so that we can compare the two, it's 1.25. 1.25 could be mistaken as being bigger than 1.3 because it's got more digits. But actually, if we look in the ones column, there's 1, but in the tenths column in 1.25, there are only 2 tenths, whereas in 1.3, there are 3 tenths. So comparing those numbers, 1.3 is bigger than 1.25, and 1.25 is the same as 1 1/4. This could be a tricky one, because if we've got 1 and 5 1/100ths, we have to understand that the second digit after the decimal point is the hundredth. And some people might make the common mistake of writing 1 and 5 1/100ths down as 1.5, but it's not. 1.5 is 1 and 5 tenths. So it's a bit of a tricky one. 1 and 5 1/100ths is 1.05, not 1.5. And when we compare that with 1.4, 1.4 is bigger because it's got 4 tenths, and 1.05 has got no tenths. And in this last one, we've got a little extra job to do. It's a bit difficult to compare 1 3/5 with 1.5 straight away. So what we can do is we can change the 3/5 to 6 tenths, and that makes it a lot more easy to compare the two. 1 6 tenths is 1.6, and 1.6 is bigger than 1.5. Now have a go at some of the examples in the sheet. Fraction decimal equivalents 1.